Our guest for the next session is one of the few personalities who can speak with confidence and knowledge about the complex interactions between finance, politics, technology and business. And that's exactly what we need to keep track of things in turbulent times like this. Please welcome Ann-Kristin Achleitner. Great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
She held the Chair of Entrepreneurial Finance at Technical University of Munich from 2001 to 2020. She's an active investor herself, and she serves as a non-executive director on the boards of companies like MunichRE and Linde. We're really glad that you joined us today. I said it seems like we are living in turbulent times. The pandemic, but also supply shortages in many different industries are affecting our everyday lives, and they are slowing down economic development. At the same time, the countries of the world are struggling to find answers to tackle climate change together. It's not sure whether all those measures will be enough. And Germany is currently without a real government, although it seems as we might have a government very soon. So, looking at this background, what's happening? Are you among the people who see the doom coming and that everything is lost, or are you still optimistic that everything will somehow be all right?
Thank you. I hope it's a good sign that we're going to have a government soon. So one of the problems you raised is solved. Yes, of course. I think we're all a bit depressed. I mean, it starts with not us being here physically having the meeting, which would have been great. But on a large scale, I'm of course optimistic, because you said, how do we think about the future? I think we're going to have the future that we make. It's totally open how the future looks like. We can influence, and we have to be optimistic, because optimistic means that you have the feeling that you can influence that future. Otherwise, you wouldn't even start doing anything. It wouldn't be, the future that you shape. And it also means that you should take responsibility, which I found was great when I saw the paper that the new government issued this afternoon, that it starts with the sentence, we're going to take responsibility, which I thought was a first great sentence.
That's great. So we start on an optimistic tone. Before we talk about the big picture again, we talk about something even more pleasant first. We talk about food. You recently pointed out in an article that it is crucial for the world, but especially for Europe, to focus on new technologies for food production. Now, we've been producing food forever. Why is it so crucial now to try new ways to produce food?
I think that has two sides, because as you rightly say, I said food is important for the world, and it's important for Europe that we move here. I think if you look at the development of the population, it's very clear until I think 2050 it will grow by 25%. This means we will need 50% more food. That when populations are richer, that food, which is very right, gets better. So we'll even have more demand, specifically in meat, but in other sources too. And we know that a major part of the emissions problem we have is from the nutrition sector. So there's no way that we can fulfill that without delinking the CO2 emissions and all the problems we have. It's other stuff too, like water or so, from the raise in food supply that we need. We have to come up with innovation here. So the point is that if we talk about the world, that we need new food alternatives because of the growth already. But it would also make a lot of sense because of the issues we have now, if we would somehow replace some of the nutrition we have now by protein alternatives. Now, if it comes to Europe, the point was that it makes a lot of sense why, if we come up with new stuff, Europe should really struggle to be in the front line of doing something here. Mm-hmm.
Let's touch on this thing you said earlier first, the alternatives. What could you be more specific about what technological improvements and innovations are there that we could use to produce different food now?
I think, for example, if obviously we do this with a lot of aspects, like eggs, fish, other stuff. But for example, if we talk about proteins, we stay with meat, because meat is a very important part. You can either go on plant alternatives, for example, or you can go on created meat. Now, when I looked into it, I was really stunned, because we feel it's new to see that the monks, the medieval monks in China, already used to have plant-based alternatives of meat in order to be polite. They were vegan and they wanted to be polite to their visitors. So it's not that new at all. And created meat is actually printed, and it's also very. It could be a great alternative if we get through with regulation and if we have these scaling up capabilities.
Now you said Europe should be running up front here in this development. Now, if you look at other technological breakthroughs that happened during the last decades, it wasn't always the case that Europe was the front runner. Why should it be different in food tech?
Now, this is part of negative thinking, because we have no alternative. I mean, if you believe in Europe, it's very important that we build new industries, and there are several new industries now. That's why I said, with food, yes, more stuff has developed already in the United States, but we have a long tradition of healthy food here, of culture in Europe, so that it would fit. There are other fields like, for example, if you look at quantum technology, we have the highest amount of scientific papers in quantum technology right now still in Europe. So there are other fields where I hope that we're going to be cutting edge, and they really strive to do it, and we're not depressed before we start.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we talked about the theory and what you're saying, that there are a lot of great stuff happening here. We have a great example that we want to experience now together, and you can try out something sweet, a very sweet example for food tech, because we are bringing another guest on stage. Stay tuned for a second.
Hey, should I put it there?
Yeah.
A secret surprise.
Welcome here on stage. Joining me and Ann-Kristin Achleitner is Maximilian Marquart.
Hi.
Max is the CEO and co-founder, together with his sister Sarah, of QOA, the world's first cocoa-free chocolate company. And it's based in Munich, which is great. Max, let's get right into the middle of what you're doing. We were talking about plant-based alternatives for meat earlier. Now you have a cocoa-free alternative for chocolate. How did you manage to make chocolate without the main ingredient?
First of all, thanks for having me here. We're kind of, I would say, the Oatly of Munich, I would say, because, Oatly was also two siblings that founded that. One brother that was kind of the scientist, and one brother who was kind of the economist or the CEO of that company. And also with my sister, it's the same story, actually, with QOA. We founded the company because my sister is the science part in the company. I already had a company before that I founded, so I knew how to kind of build businesses. And we started actually thinking about QOA end of last year. And the funny thing is, we've been quite quick because we already have a first product, because my sister has 10 years of experience in flavor science. She worked in the field of Maillard chemistry. Maillard chemistry is a specific field where kind of it describes the chemical reaction that happens. For example, if you put a steak into a pan, it gets brown on the top, on the bottom. In a way, this browning effect, that reaction is an aroma-creating reaction called Maillard reaction. Carbohydrates react with amino acids in a way, and that reaction forms certain aromatic compounds. And she did some research on that for 10 years, and that helped us to be very quick and establish something like that quite quickly.
So what does make the chocolate taste in those sweets?
How does it taste?
What's responsible for the chocolate taste?
In a way, what we're using is side products of other kind of food processes. At the moment, we use oats and apricot kernels in a way. Because they're quite protein rich, and we put them into a specific fermentation and roasting process, and we kind of, it's similar to beer brewing, a little bit more controlled in a way. And that process, this kind of beer brewing process, how I call it, causes certain aroma compounds being created that taste and that kind of give a perception of chocolate in a way. And so we can make out of oat and apricot kernels, we can make chocolate pretty much.
That sounds great. I think you brought something to explain it more detailed to us. Yeah. And we can have a look at this and you explain it to us.
Sure. Regarding that slide, normally you start on the left. I would suggest we start on the right side, where you can see our QOA, or chocolate in a way. And as you know, chocolate and as well QOA consists of mainly two components. One, there's a powder component and a butter component. For sure, there's also sugar and milk powder in normally. But the main components that you find in a chocolate is cacao powder and cacao butter in a way. And we substitute both components with our QOA powder and QOA butter. So you can see that in the middle. And the QOA powder is pretty much a solid state fermentation, a certain production process. And the QOA butter is based on sugar molasses and certain yeast bacteria that kind of produce those 3 acylglycerides that are needed to create that kind of that butter structure. You know, butter is very important because this is kind of the component that gives that melting behavior in your mouth. If you like eat a chocolate, you bite on it, it cracks, and then it melts slowly in your mouth. So both components are quite crucial, and both components are being made from side products with our special fermentation process.
Now, Ann-Kristin Achleitner told us that one of the reasons why we should look for alternatives for traditional meat production is the climate impact of food production, of meat production. Now, what's the reason to substitute cocoa?
Actually, I mean, when we started that business, I first learned about kind of how threatened cocoa is per se. So that was the starting point. I read a book by Rob Dunn, Never Out of Season. It's actually a very good book, and he's writing about the pests and diseases that are threatening cocoa and the cocoa supply of the future. You know, 70% of cocoa is coming from 2 countries, Ghana and Ivory Coast. So it's incredible. Like, it's a very centralized supply chain. And if that breaks down, like for example, if a pest arrives in Ghana and Ivory Coast, that 70% will be lost within like just 1 or 2 years. That's fact. So that was our first reason. But then for sure, there's also climate impact related to this. At the moment, over 3 million acres of rainforest have been plowed down for cocoa plantation, and that gives chocolate a catastrophic like CO2 footprint in a way. If you eat 1 kilogram of chocolate, you're responsible for 19 kilograms of CO2. So it's nearly as bad as cheese and meat in a way. It's not as bad, but like on 5th place, it's pretty much so. It really has a footprint. And then we, like, for sure there are other reasons as well, like child labor, child slavery, water scarcity, monocultural ways of planting it, loss of biodiversity. So there are plenty of reasons. The whole supply chain is completely rotten, to be honest. And we want to kind of, what we want to do is like provide a second pillar to that supply chain to take a little bit of load out of it. So for us, it's not about just like substituting cocoa. That doesn't make sense. But just like providing a second pillar and reducing the load on that supply chain a little bit. I think that just makes sense.
So what do you think when you hear about this idea?
I think it's great, and I think it's great, and it absolutely shows what innovation can do when you come up with that list. And as you said, I would have guessed water is something that we don't talk about that much, but is also a major issue. And it's very interesting that you also state that you don't want to replace cocoa as such, but you want to add it. That was my point about meat too. It's not, and which I think is also very important for the public debate, that we don't want to take one thing out and force, something new on everyone else, but it's about replacing, and it's about alternatives. And then we see, what the choice means.
I think we as humans, we just eat too little variance. 200 years ago, I once read that we had 17 animals in a way, and we ate over 200 different crops or cereals. Now we're eating pork, chicken, and beef, and we're eating wheat, soy, and it's very limited what we eat at the moment. And this I think this is the stuff that ruins our current food system. And yeah, as you say, I agree with you. We need to.
Yeah, but there's another also ethical point to it, because exactly as you say, there are a lot of issues there also from a humanitarian aspect. But at the same time, if we would decide to pull out, for example, no longer take any cocoa from Africa, we would cause a different issues that would be very tough for the population there that has to earn. So I think that is also approach that is careful that you're taking it, that you're saying, you don't want to replace it, but you want to fight for an alternative, because, whatever we do on the innovation side, we shouldn't forget, what it means to those, that have been producing, the stuff we're replacing, and it should be inclusive, if you innovate.
So let's find out if it's not only a careful approach, but also a tasteful approach. So maybe we can just try it.
So good in already describing it, the way that it was melting on the tongue.
Maybe to explain it. In every of those small boxes, there's a praline in, right? And there are different pralines in. They are not all the same. We try to mimic kind of very famous flavors that you might find in the retail shelf as well, but some are a little bit more artisanal.
And if I get this praline, would you produce the praline, or would you be a B2B approach that you would sell to companies producing pralines?
In the future, we want to be the Givaudan of ingredients in a way. Like Givaudan does flavors, we want to provide ingredients that are not sustainable now, so we want to be B2B. We want to really provide to Nestle, to Mars, to the big ones.
But that's made by you. Like right now, you're producing yourself.
They're made by us, but they're like hugely expensive and a lot of manual labor. Actually, it wasn't Sarah and me doing them. We had a chocolatier, like a world champion in chocolate making with us to help us, because like just the manufacturing part is difficult.
It's superb.
Yeah, tastes great. It tastes like real chocolate. Don't you think so? Could you taste the difference?
I wouldn't even ask myself whether that was. That's great. It's absolutely great.
Thanks.
Thank you. If it was chocolate, it would be super chocolate.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I grew up close to Belgium, so.
So you know about chocolate?
Yeah.
That's a proof of taste.
Yeah. Great. Max, I know that you're starting with chocolate, but you already kind of teased us about your future plans. But maybe we can look even more in the future. What do you have in mind? What could QOA be in a couple of years?
Yeah, as I said, we want to be a B2B ingredient supplier. I think that's important for us. We don't want to build up our own chocolate brand. It just doesn't make any sense for us. We're just starting with chocolate, actually. White chocolate. Chocolate is quite an exclusive, an expensive product as well. So it's easier to produce it as a first step. But for sure, there are other, for example, tropical oils that we can tackle. For example, palm oil. For example, coconut oil. So all those things are like further down the road. And I think, as I said, like in the future, maybe we can be the Chiwoda of ingredients, have a big ingredient platform and supply ingredients made by technology and not by land use change and slavery. And that's our exchange land use and slavery and deforestation by technology and fermentation. I think that's our plan. And yeah, we're working on this, trying to tackle with the first B2B players and trying to launch some first products, and yeah, it's exciting.
Great. So we're hopefully looking at a European champion here.
May I ask you one question, because
sure.
As Wolfgang said, I'm fighting for ecosystems here, also from a financial side. If you have this great product and you're taking in venture capitalists, because I strongly believe it's also about the not only the money they get, but the quality of the intermediaries. Where it would make a difference if that would grow. What do you expect from a venture capitalist that you're working with?
What do I expect?
Yeah, what's the best value added apart from needing capital, which is obvious, but what makes the difference for you?
I think it depends a little bit on the stage of the company. We are very, very early stage. For us at the moment, the crucial thing. We could easily select different venture capitalists. We came out of Y Combinator. For us, it was very easy to select and to get the best ones. And we were very selective, and we just chose the ones that shared our mission at first. So that was very helpful, because without sharing our mission, this wouldn't have worked. From a helping perspective, I think at the moment contacts are most relevant. Contacts to chefs, contacts to B2B players, contacts in the industry, contacts to Ghana as well. We're working with one investor also, getting a network in Ghana and Ivory Coast. Why Ghana and Ivory Coast? Because we really have to understand how the farmers work as well. Because, as I said, it would be we don't want to take away their work or their livelihood in a way. So that's cool if we have those contacts and that insight in the industry. And I think that's the most crucial thing for us now at this stage. I think later on it might change, rather like financial add-ons or something, like if someone can help us to get the right finance sources. But I don't know. At the moment, it's contacts.
So it's also about the intersection. Sorry for taking over the job here,
that's totally fine.
But I find this a great case, because if I take from what you say, it's also about the intersection, because you're B2B, between you of a startup and the big companies like Nestle, etc., where it's about finding inroads. We just discussed that before the conference, understanding how they tick when they make decisions and all this. Which
exactly, that's the only thing that I'm interested in. I'm also not interested in CVC or something like that. That's not what drives me, but really having VCs that have, again, that know persons in companies, in retailers, in the industry. That's the interesting part. So
you VC guys out there, I hope you were listening. You have to add value, otherwise the startups don't want you. Max, thank you so much for sharing this insight and your vision. And I guess because we have no physical audience, but we do have some speakers in the room, and I guess they might want to try the chocolate without cocoa too. So maybe you could get them some too. That would be amazing.
Do you want a second piece? I don't want to take it.
Well, if something's left over, I would take another one, but the others first. But you feel free.
Okay,
No,
I just wanted to advise you that M60 is very good.
You're our special guest of today, so you.
But I have one surprise for you. There's a complete supermassive test kit in the back here.
Wow.
If you want, you can have
Great.
one and take it.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm
Perfect.
going to spread the
All of
news.
them.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thanks, Max.
Yeah, you're welcome. I leave that with you.
And I already heard that we have a number of questions from the audience out there lining up. So maybe we could just switch over to our control room and Christiane, and she might share some questions from the audience to Ann-Kristin Achleitner.
Yes, thank you, Wolfgang. So yes, we have a couple of questions. The first one, or the highest rated one, is what about the nations that are not first world? How could and can they adapt alternatives way of growing food?
So just that I get this right, the question was about third world countries and how they can change in order to also grow that kind of food.
Yeah.
I think that's an incredibly important question because it's in the food sector, but it's also in other sectors that we have the question, if we only have one planet and if we want to change, it's very important, that life changes, industry changes in those countries, which means that we also have to share innovation, we have to build capacities down there if we're producers. And I think this is something that first those that produce, who have new innovations, should have in their back hat. For example, totally different field now, but outside of food, but BioNTech, for example, is building a factory down in Africa. But it also means that we have to build incubators. We have to work down there in order to support entrepreneurship and bring these ideas to those countries. And this is something that we are responsible for, but I think that's also something that countries who think about that, and it doesn't have to be third world, it's other regions too, like for example Gulf countries and whatsoever, that are contemplating about how to develop their economy, have to foster.
All right, let's take another question from the audience, and then I ask some more questions too, but another one from the audience, Christiane.
Yeah, this one is going back to our world. How can we change what we eat but keep traditional foods and our food culture?
And that would mean that the new stuff that we eat would be outside of our culture. Now, if, for example, we just take what we just ate, all the ingredients is something that is part of our culture too. I think so. That is one aspect that is important. Then, for example, if I take food and take meat that I know best first. It's how much we feel something is different. It also depends on the generation. For example, my middle-aged women seem to be the most difficult group to support, unlike, for example, young men. So I think the important thing is that we're liberal, we're open, so that everyone can eat what they want and will change over time. And the next thing you might say that is not an answer to your question, because the point would how can we stick with traditions? I think if you're open and the things are adapted, for example, if I talk about a European food tradition where we work with the new stuff, this is also important because that will come up with alternatives in the kind of nutrition that we know. It means that we don't have big chains and in that way a culture different, but we adopt whatever we do, which, for example, if you talk about cultured meat, you can adopt the taste of cultured meat exactly to the region where you are. So it means, you can even have a more local approach than you would have otherwise.
Thanks for answering questions from the community. Now I wanted to follow up on something that you asked Max, actually, because you asked him about what VCs should add to their startup and focusing on the ecosystem. Now, what do you think? What should the ecosystem be like to support startups in food tech, but also in other sectors, especially where Europe could be a front runner?
It depends on the sector that you're in. I think 10 years, and times are changing. 10 years ago, it was good that we at least had venture capitalists, because we didn't have too much of financing that it starts. It was about experience, it was about contacts, but now it's spreading, and it's very different whether you're a deep tech investor or not. This comes down to the industry, where you have to be specialized in the industries, you have to know the different kinds of personalities, and it's not only about VCs, it's also about different breeds of investors. For example, in deep tech, I think family offices or longer running funds, also very important, a very important group.
Especially for startups that are very science-based or research-based?
Yes, because you have more risk and you need much more time to prove the point. For example, just to come back to the BioNTech example, because it's the most prominent one right now, but also because you have the chance to it here. We should not forget how long they have been working on the cancer side, which has two sides. First, it took a lot of years, and I was deeply impressed when I heard that when the Springmann family invested in them, they gave them the promise that for 10 years they would not, intermingle. So, this means something. To give someone a lot of money and then say, I don't intermingle for 10 years, And if you were a fund, you would not be able to do this, And the second thing that I found interesting here, also that he mentioned how long his sister had been working on some solutions, which also proved the point of fundamental research being important, and that she could build. That is very similar to the BioNTech example, that it takes a lot of years that you're researching, doing something, and suddenly, if in the right situation, you have the breakthrough moment.
But would you say that the BioNTech success story was just a coincidence, and because they had investors who were thinking in this long term, in it's saying, okay, you have 10 years and we don't interfere, is that a usual situation in Germany and Europe, or would you say we need more of this approach?
No, first of all, I would no way would I want to be understood the way that BioNTech was coincidental. I think there's so much personality, expertise, sweat work. There's so much intensity in there. It's not coincidental. But there's this old saying that luck is when opportunity meets preparedness, and that's actually what happened there. And they had, I think, very decided. It was not their first company when they found it. They knew exactly what they were looking for. So it was a very obvious decision that they decided on the Springmann family and Mr. Moschmann also with his company, because they knew they were looking for a long-term investor, which you hear often in the drug development field also. That would not be untypical. But I think, yes, this is exactly what we need. We need patient capital, as we would say. That doesn't have to be a family office. It will often be family offices. It might be funds that are running longer. It might also be a different approach by the state funding that, because deep tech really is different to e-commerce companies or other stuff.
As we are about to have a new government, maybe you can give them some advice here. What could be or should be the role of the state exactly to promote, that we have more BioNTechs here?
Yeah, I think if it comes to finance, I strongly believe that intermediaries are important. So I think the way. One thing is about, one question is about money, but I think the question is, how do you use that money? So the first thing is, if it's used in order to build intermediaries so that they can grow, I think that makes a lot more sense for me to having a big state sector that is an alternative, because that way nothing owned grows. And if we always debate that, you always have foreign investors, not German investors, the point is, that they have to grow, develop, etc., and, the state should help there. But I think, for me, very important would be, it's not only about money, which would sound funny for you from a finance professor, but there are various aspects that are incredibly important. It's about regulation. You can't compensate with money if the regulation hinders you to do certain stuff, whether it's difficult. And it's about agility, it's about speediness, but it's also about the state as a client, which is something that we rarely ever discuss here, and which is very important in fields like, if you're in space, within quantum, there's so many fields where the state is a very important client and makes a huge difference in foreign countries. And if we would change our public procurement in Germany in order to have that in back mind, the state would make a huge difference without investing more money.
Now that's the the part, if you already have startups, how the state could support it. Now, I know that you also care a lot about education. We know we need education in order to have great founders. What do you think should change in our education system that we have right now?
I passionately believe in education, as you, and I think that is if I had one wish free, it would be education. In various reasons, it would be the quality of education. It would be that education is free to everyone exactly in the amount, and that you look for both sides. High level education as well, that you help everyone. It starts, I think it's not only about founders, it starts much earlier. What we see that if it comes to elementary education, in the MINT cases, technology-oriented cases, elementary school kids are behind the OECD average in Germany. So we should really build on that. Schools should be more open, more digital, and that would help, for a population to be open to technology, to risk. My dream is not that everyone would be an entrepreneur. This is not what I mean. But in order to be an entrepreneurial society, in order to be open about the future and about the technology, you must understand it. You must be schooled in it. You must be open for jobs in that field. And so education for me is at the heart of everything. Whatever you do later.
Let's talk about different sectors. You already touched them. We talked a lot about food tech. We already touched quantum and space. So maybe you could tell us a bit more why you think that those sectors might be like the next big thing, or among the next big things, and how we are positioned in this global race, because in the US and in China there's a lot going on in those fields too.
Exactly, as you say, a lot is going on, and it's very important. When I say the future depends on how we behave. I think that that we are in some decisive years where a lot of things will be decided. And if we look at quantum, it's right now that sums that are being invested are really exploding. We are in a seriously good position, but we have to make the best out of that, which means we also have all these scientific articles that are being written have to be translated into startups, and these startups have to scale, and they need the protection, because in every country, there's a political side to that. So I think we are in a very good position. But we have to make something out of that. Yeah. So I think first stories of very successful companies that we have here, should be a signal that should also motivate others. But there are some cases here, the situation is already different in the field of new space. For me, it's striking that you see a whole industry developing, and I've not seen that before in the 25 years that I have been in that field, that with new space, you have, I don't know, the last time I heard a number, it was 130, but it will be 150 or something startups that we have in this sector, and they're growing, they're having success, they're going to the stock exchange. We're all very proud of ESA and Health Warning. I'm invested because I strongly believe in them. So we have a great development here. We have great entrepreneurs, and we have a great market that is developing, because what we see is the industrialization of space. So there's a new market that needs to be conquered. But still, there are very important aspects here. Like when I come back to the state as a client, a lot of the space field is decided by states, nations, as clients, and it's very important that we're open to startups. That we not only allow the big companies, the incumbents, in order to pitch for something, and that we change procurement, like the Americans have done.
Oh, I agree with you that it's fascinating to see a real industry grow, because these are startups that open factories. They can literally go to a factory opening by a startup. We've been covering this field for time, and this doesn't happen too often. And now, ESA Aerospace, you can name it.
Great if you comment on that. That is, to be frank, I mean, I always knew about ESA Aerospace, and and there were certain links, but when I said I'm a big fan, I was at the opening of their production site, and if you're there, you see how important 3D printing is, and all these links, how it comes together, and so I think if you report on that, if you write about this, this is important. We should talk about it.
Yes, absolutely. We at One we did a lot of reporting on new space startups, ESA Aerospace, but also quantum startups, and all this kind of successful startups. Do you feel that something's changing, like in the societal view on startups, on tech, by having these very successful examples?
I think a lot has been changing, but not specifically in the field that you mentioned. I think, as I said, I've been a professor for 25 years, 19 years at the TU, and one of the reasons I'm so optimistic is that in all that time, I've never seen a generation of founders that is at the same time so energetic, building companies, and what really touches me, not only being great builders and starters, but being also socially interested and doing stuff here. It's much broader than being a business technology movement only. So I'm very positive about that. I see that in the newspapers you have a trend to cover it a bit more, also in the mainstream big newspaper. But I don't see yet that the population has really changed its opinion to entrepreneurial thinking. But I hope that this comes now. If I had two wishes, I would hope that in the general population, being a startup entrepreneur, building something, gets more appreciation and more people wanting it, who had before been afraid. The other thing that I would hope for is that this new group that is impressive is not a new silo that we have in Germany, because we just talked about contacts to industry. We already have in Germany a silo of economy and politics and other fields like education, where in other countries people move. And if you look at the economy, we already have a silo of DAX companies and family companies that are somehow different. And suddenly we have a third silo, And I think what would be important is that it's a joint effort, because otherwise it won't work.
You said that the entrepreneurs that you've been working with are very energetic and are kind of passionate and purpose-driven. Now, I know that you are also fascinated by a new type of entrepreneur that is appearing more frequently now, that is not only interested in getting rich as quickly as possible, or in just pushing technological innovations to the limit, but also in making a positive societal contribution. Now, as an economist who's specialized on finance, what do you think on such very purpose-driven founders? Some call it even social startups. Are they naive dreamers, or who want to have impact, or could they be like the next Elon Musk, just with a more positive twist?
This is the only moment where I must really protest, because I have a totally different view of entrepreneurs. Yes, there are entrepreneurs startup founders who want to get rich, and that is fine. That's how market economy also works. But if you look at the motivation of founders, their main reason normally is different. They want to be independent. They have a different spirit and all this. Why they're less mainstream? Why they want to build something? And specifically, if you go to tech founders, you mentioned Elon Musk, or if you think of the BioNTech founders, specifically in deep tech, they are seriously driven by changing something, by helping people, changing something differently. If you look at a hardcore engineer, he's driven by finding a better solution and not by getting rich. I mean, so this is different, and I think this is also different in deep tech a bit from e-commerce, also where you would see more business people than other fields. Now, and then being social. I mean, what could be more social than saving other people's life? I mean, so I would be a bit careful with this, this view of social entrepreneurs, implying others are unsocial. But yes, you're right. For me, being entrepreneurial is a way of thinking, a way of feeling, and the word entrepreneurship doesn't come from the economy, it comes often. So for me, you can be an entrepreneurial politician, I think a state can be entrepreneurial, you can be an entrepreneurial professor, and the idea of taking entrepreneurial ideas to some sectors, some parts of the social sector, one must be careful, only some parts, because there are other fields where you can't do it. Obviously something that I find striking, and they're very interesting studies why someone doesn't become a business entrepreneur but a social entrepreneur. Normally it has something to do with being touched personally by a need or something. I think that is a field that is growing, that is important, that has changed a lot. For example, someone like Andreas Heinecke, who built Dialogue in the Dark, social science centers, who's a personal friend, had a huge impact. But this will always only be part part of the arena, and we should help that part more also.
Do you think we need more business and new business models or for those kind of startups? Because they, when they compete to startups who are VC cases, for example, they end up having not enough money maybe to fulfill their vision. Do you think there might be some new ways of financing those kind of startups?
Yeah. Now there are several questions in there. First, absolutely. I think whatever we can do to help these kind of social entrepreneurs, we should do it. And it's not only money, but it's also money. But it's also, help. Lawyers can help. Marketing people can help. I think we should really do this. The other question is, do we need a change in capitalism? And how is it about financing? Let me answer the financing question first. What I see the first time is that financing gets much broader. The old days you had classical return-oriented financing, and you had like stipends, stipends, or we're giving away something to charity. But it was digital in a way, yeah. But what you suddenly see, what is important for the social world, but also for the environmental world, that it's, I don't know what the English word of aufgefächert is, but it's a whole spectrum, and you can see where on the spectrum you would be, between a financial return and a social return. You could say that because of environmental or social reasons, you take less of a financial return. You could imagine people investing into something but not expecting return. And I think that is a huge change in the markets that's also coming with a new generation. Yeah, new generation of investors that you see there, which is a big opportunity that is changing. And now just to finish it, because I think this purpose thing, there's something in between that I also feel, because you say, do I feel you need more? I think we should be more liberal in allowing these various forms to live next to each other. Something that I also fought for was that if you feel that you don't want to hand over as a family company, your company to your genetic family, but you want to give it to the people you feel should take over, for example, because you have a small company, you should be allowed to do this. Yeah. There was a lot of protest against it, saying, this is out of the system of capitalism. But I would say, and that is a debate, I would say, let people, if some people want to do it that way, let them do it that way, and if we can have a legal form to do it, fine, and then we will say, does it fly or doesn't it fly? We'll see in reality. Yeah. So that is also an answer to that question.
Let's talk more about the financing part. That you said there's now a whole spectrum of financing opportunities for startups and a new generation of investors. Now there are a lot of even VC funds who are, have the goal to tackle climate change, and they try to find out which is the right criteria to find out if a startup is really doing something about climate change or not. The ESG criteria is often used, or many of them. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance, so many standards. Do you think that investments that are based on this kind of criteria could be a key to tackle climate change, or do you think that we have to do some homework to make this kind of investments work?
Now, this is a very difficult question, because it's a difficult situation what these funds do. And I've seen this on the other side also of companies really trying to be serious about ESG, but having to work with this change on the investor side. You see, so to say, several waves. Yeah? The first wave that you see is that financing thinks of ESG as a risk. So you will not invest into something who's exposed to ESG risk, which means, you're fining off companies that are doing something. For example, if you would be around coal or something, that might be an issue. The second thing is that you would, and people are adhering to that, and finance is used as, as a transmission mechanism also. And I think, yes, that works. But the second thing is that people invest in stuff that is good ESG-wise. It's about new energy fields or so, which is also good. But what do you do with companies in the transition phase? What is best for the planet? actually best for the planet is that those industries that are important but still have to go their way, that they're encouraged in changing, being more ESG friendly. For example, if you take the cement industry, the cement industry from an ESG perspective is challenged. There's no way, but what would you want if everyone goes out of cement because it's not an ESG friendly thing?
Then we have no cement.
Then you have no cement, which in a way, if you think of it, so what would you want? You would want cement companies to very actively work on friendly, which, some of them do more successfully than others. So that would be a mechanism for me that is also important, that, companies would show in a reliable way how they get more ESG friendly. And because you do need technological innovation, etc., that might take some time, but that you have data that shows reliable that they're on that track, which is a bit of a difference to what is happening right now. Because, you're really making a difference between a good or bad ones, and it's not, and data very often is also still not seen from a financial, but from a communicative perspective.
Now you touched regulation, because even if an investor, let's say an investor wants to support companies that make the transition, or startups that are working on tackling climate change, they might not have the returns. They might not deliver the returns that companies deliver that are not focusing on protecting the climate or reducing their carbon footprint. So do you think we need more regulation to make saving the world a good business?
No, several in here. Yes, I think because we have one planet, we need some regulation, and we need it on an international level. Yeah, but if we're talking about, and this is also the fact, because capital markets can't look after the whole problem. If you look after the companies that are polluting, only a certain part and a slower part is independently financed by our capital markets. In the public markets, you have big companies that have major state equity stakes. So it's not the capital markets. You have a huge amount of companies that are private. So that is true, that you need another regulation. However, if you say, would a startup get less money from the capital market because they're more environmental friendly than another startup, that's exactly why I think that capital markets are changing. I think it's so much easier today to find something if you're a startup. It's more difficult if you're a bigger company, what I've seen, because if you're a bigger company, then if you change your business model, for example, to the renewable sector, what actually happens if you change is that the standard investors leave the company the moment that you take those decisions that imply costs, investment, and risk, so they directly leave, because they know that exactly what you mentioned is going to happen, while the environmentally oriented investors say, okay, that's nice, but let's see whether it works, which means that you have this dip that is very dangerous for a company to go through.
It's especially dangerous for a country like Germany with a lot of traditional industries that have to transform, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I've seen it in another European country. You're exactly right, and that needs to be discussed, because if you have a big incumbent, and we're talking about ESG here, you also have responsibility for the people working in your companies. I mean, one shouldn't forget how big these traditional big German or European companies are, and if you're running them, you have a responsibility for the environment, but you also have a responsibility for your employees, and you're taking these risks. So I think the decisions that management have to take there are much more complicated than is seen. And the second thing is, I think also the ESG world is moving, although I think that's a good move, that the data, the demands on the ESG side get much tougher. What we actually see is that the environmental data is moving into the financial side, that if you promise something, most probably you're going to be held liable for that in some years, the same way you would be held liable for financial information, or you might even have to go ad hoc at some point in time. This is not the case now, but it might move into that direction.
Let's see if Christiane has new questions from the audience for us.
Yes, I do. There's one question I find particularly interesting, and somebody asks, yesterday we heard a lot about DAOs, so decentralized autonomous organizations. Will they play a role in venture capital? And if yes, will they be disruptive or constructive tools?
Sorry, I only got the second part, whether it's constructive or disruptive and alternative, but who was alternative?
The DAO, the decentralized autonomous organization, like a company or an organization that's built on the blockchain, that has no central central organization, but it's decentralized, and all people who have the tokens can kind of do the governance.
The frank answer is I would guess so, but I can't judge on that.
That's some from the crypto crowd from yesterday.
Yeah.
Do you have a more general question too, Christiane?
No, but I must just admit, I would pretend. I could tell you something, but I would pretend to be an expert. I'm not.
Thank you. That's a very honest answer. There's another question, again regarding food. Many people think that artificial food is not as good as natural food. For instance, the chocolate example we just heard, or vanilla and vanillin. How can we convince people for new sustainable alternatives?
Now, I was just convinced. I think the tasting thing is very important, but the first question is about convincing is, I think when the first part of the wisdom, crowds, when the first part of people try to do it, you just get used to it. It's like, for example, if you look at fashion, it works the same way. I mean, the first people started, you think it's crazy, and suddenly, 1 or 2, 3 years later, it's mainstream. So what I think, if the critical mass in the population starts it, others would suddenly try to do it themselves and get infected. I think that would be an important thing. I think if people have prejudices, to try to talk to them and say something, the question is good, and try to convince them on a logical way. There are limits to do that. I would go more on this as I said, the psychological path.
That's a good keyword, the psychological. Well, not psychological, but I want to get more on a bit on a personal level, because as you were talking about entrepreneurs, you said when I said they are about making money, which I've of course only said because I wanted to be critical. You said that many entrepreneurs are driven by being independent, doing their own thing. Now we are still living through the COVID-19 pandemic, and that showed us that we as individuals are pretty powerless in some situations and are dependent on external factors, being it a pandemic or being it the decisions of other people. So to what extent has that changed the way that you look at the world and society?
I think we're not that powerless, because as you, you, for example, as organizing this, could also react in a different way. You could say 3 times say shit, and just do it this way and try to make best way, and then, learn something that you use next year, or you could just have canceled. Yeah. So I think there are different answers that you can have, and we have seen it has been incredibly tough for a lot of people. But we've seen impressive examples of how you can react to that. What it has done to me is that it has brought the whole aspect of health much closer. Yes, and you can't do something about, you're much more dependent on nature than on health, and you have a much deeper gratitude for everything that has to do with health. I've lost friends. The other thing is, and here again, I'm happy to see what the new government has published today. I think it should also show you the gratitude that you have to the people in our society who are doing certain roles, and in a way, the way that society pays and respects nurses and people in other fields was something that already touched me before Corona came, and I've been active in that field because I know hospitals. I was struck that through Corona, we didn't, with the experience of the first waves, we didn't change that. And that's something else that I think that Corona shows us, that we do need a societal debate, about how we pay for how we respect certain kind of jobs, and that is needed. And if we now have a bonus or so, this is a one-time thing, but I hope that we're going to have a bit of debate for that. And this is something that was more obvious for me, has been obvious before, but has become even more obvious through the crisis.
Now, one group of people that, apart from health workers, for example, that were particularly affected by the pandemic and are right now are small, like entrepreneurs with small business, like that have their restaurants that are, you know, selling stuff on Christmas markets. People who took risk to start their own thing, and they are now kind of being punished for taking the risk. So, do you think that might make it even more difficult to encourage people here in Germany to take the personal risk in order to achieve something and start a business?
Partially, yes. There are big groups in society that were entrepreneurs, people who, you know, had little shops, were trainers, whatsoever, had an incredibly tough time. And that, yes, it did show that if you're entrepreneurial, as opposed to being a civil servant, that I have been a lot of years, so it's not about negative about civil servants, but that risk meant something very different. I'm with you there, and I think we have to discuss this. Yeah.
But at the beginning of our talk, you still said you're optimistic. So maybe you could make a plenary of why taking risk, being entrepreneurial, have an entrepreneurial spirit. And you said you don't have to be you don't have to found a startup to be an entrepreneur. Why is it worth being an entrepreneur, even with all these challenges?
Why it's worth thinking entrepreneurial?
Yeah.
Now, this account, because, you know, it's so much nicer if you can influence. I mean, the feeling that you can influence whatever is being done. For example, I just said about teachers now, and you mentioned social entrepreneurs. Social entrepreneurs, purpose entrepreneurship, so much older. If you think of education, Maria Montessori, you know, what she has done to the educational system. I mean, you know, to be able to do something, be entrepreneurial in that way, you know, is great because you know what you're doing, you're having impact. And I think if we talk about risk, and your question was getting a bit into that direction, how much risk should be taken? I've huge respect about the risk that those people had. And I personally, I'm also more, I'm not the person that doesn't like risk, and entrepreneurs in general don't like risk more than other people. That's a misunderstanding. It's just about managing risk. I think the big risk is about not doing anything, you know, as a person or as a society, yeah, or as an economy that we don't discuss, because everything has been so fine that we just think things stay the same if we don't do anything. I think that's exactly not what's going to take the day. So talking about risk, I mean, trying to do something, trying to make something, for me, is less risky about not doing something. And that is the perspective. Mm.
Great. Thank you for this great final statement of our panel. And you even mentioned Maria Montessori, and I went to a Montessori kindergarten. So
you know exactly, yeah.
Glad to hear it.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Ann-Kristin Achleitner, for taking the time and sharing all those insights with us and trying chocolate with us. That was great. No. So you guys out there, think entrepreneurial, it's worth it. It's more fun in life.